I made these today and I'm going to show you how. Full disclosure, I made a big mistake and I did not even realize it until the end of the project. So if you intend to make these, make sure you watch until the end so that you can avoid the mistake that I made. Today's project is all about creating the bubbles effect in resin. I came across this effect some time ago, maybe a couple years now, and I've been itching to try it since I started to do my own resin projects. All the videos that I have seen though are of larger objects such as coasters or keychains. So my mission is to try this effect using smaller objects such as earrings and small pendants because nothing in principle should prevent us from achieving the same effects on smaller objects, right? Well, there's something that I should have given more consideration to. And in looking at the footage right now, I can see that there was a writing on the wall. But before I get into that, please excuse my manners. My name is Dell and welcome to Leshy Handmade. Thank you for stopping by. I am starting off this project by partially filling the cavities with 2-part epoxy resin that I colored with black pigment, and then I left it to cure. The next phase is to make some bubbles, and I'm just using dishwashing liquid with water. I attempted to make the bubbles the fancy way, but I soon realized that it was impractical, and so I just put the mixture in a container that allowed me to shake it, and in 2 seconds or less, I had the bubbles that I needed. The next phase is to add UV resin to our base, and on top of that, we will create our bubbles effect. I moved the second mold out of the way because I did not want it to get wet, since that may prevent the UV resin from sticking to the base. So I thought it was a good idea to add UV resin to all of the cavities on this mold, but I soon realized that it was not a good idea since I was doing this project in the middle of the day and the glare from the sun was coming in my space, so it actually started to cure the UV resin before I was even finished spreading it out over all of the pieces. So that is mistake number one. Be patient. It may take you a little bit more time, but it's worth it in the end. So I had to add a little bit more UV resin to ensure that a thin layer was spread over all the pieces before proceeding to add on the bubbles. When adding the bubbles, I did my best to get just the bubbles and not to get any of the water that is in the bottom of the container. This was because I did not want the water to interfere with the chemical composition of the UV resin. I'm not sure that it would have, but I just wanted to proceed on the side of caution. After doing the first piece, I also decided to use a clean popsicle stick so that I could continue using it and not have to worry about the UV resin being on it. And we can see another reason why we should not try to do too many pieces at the same time. By the time I was finished putting bubbles on all the pieces, the first set of bubbles had already popped. After curing under the UV lamp, I used a paper towel to pat dry the pieces to remove the extra bubbles and water. The next task was to mirror the bubbles that were created on the other pieces. And so I decided to start off by doing one at a time. This time I learned from my mistake. Of course, if I'm going to use these as earrings, then they need to match and mirror each other. So I was doing my best to get the bubbles in the same place, although that is almost impossible to achieve with this effect. But it was okay, since what doesn't work out as earrings can be turned into pendants or used for some other crafting project. And that is the reason why I did not use all the cavities in this mold. The triangle and the moon, they are in the same direction, so I would have to do something different if I were to use them, or if I were to try to get a matching pair of earring from them. When I was finished with the second mold, I went back to the first mold to try and get the pairs to match. And this is what we were looking at the end of that process. And it was time for the next phase, which is simply to brush on some iridescent powders onto our pieces. I started off with a somewhat generous amount of powder, but as you can see, the color is not really coming through. It's looking white and not what I was expecting based on the results that others have achieved. So I just continued to brush, and the more I brushed, the thinner the amount of powder became, and I realized that less is truly more in this situation. Most of the time, less is more when it comes on to applying mica powders in this way. Right now, I was mixing two colors and I was trying to get them so that they mirror each other. One of the worst things to me is a pair of earrings that match but do not mirror each other. So it was really important to me to get the pieces that I use different colors on to mirror each other, but I was not successful in all of them. For example, those stars, they are colored in the same places, so they will not mirror each other. I decided to try using a non-iridescent mica powder on one of the pieces to see whether or not it will reflect the color of that powder brightly. Well, it did not work, so I had to revert to the iridescent powder so that it can look bright and pretty. We are now at the final phase of this project, and all we're doing now is just topping the pieces with some clear UV resin. And at this point, I was very excited to see the finished results because apart from the mishap with the coloring, as far as I could tell, everything was done right. So I was excited to see the results. I mean, in looking at them, can you tell that something is off with them? After curing, this is what I was greeted with. And do you see the issue? That piece there that I'm pointing at where I did not spread the UV resin properly is not the issue. We have a much bigger issue. And that pendant there with that little part projecting is also not the issue. We have a much bigger issue. Did you notice that the color looked more faint when I held the mold up in my hand? That's the issue. The base layer of epoxy resin that was put in was not opaque enough. And because this mold is so shallow and I was only able to use a very thin layer, the finished result is translucent. So I can actually see through these pieces. And this will affect the overall look of these pieces. If worn as an earring, if worn as a pendant, then the body of course will be behind the pendants, so the backing will appear opaque, but earrings are just hanging in the air, and as a result there will be nothing behind it. So that is a huge thing to bear in mind if you decide to try out the bubble effect on small pieces that are shallow. Of course, this I think this can be corrected if I made the resin more opaque because that is totally possible. But how do I correct these without making a mess of the pieces? Because I do think they look pretty all in all. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you for spending this time with me, and you can do me a favor by watching more videos on the channel. Thank you so much.